Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews bringing you another year-end list. This time it is the top 10 worst albums of 2020. Before we start, just want to make a quick rule for this list going forward that there will only be one album per artist, which is fine since most of these artists only released one album this year, so I don't know why I'm saying that in the first place. But what I do want to mention though, and this is very important, believe it or not guys, this is all just my opinion. I shouldn't have to reiterate this, but it is just my opinion. If you like these albums, great, fantastic. Please continue to listen to them and enjoy them. The last thing I want this list to do is to make any of you change your mind on an album, because I am not some grand authority when it comes to music. This is not a definitive list at all. In fact, no list is definitive. It's all personal opinions. It's subjective. So if you disagree, please just leave a respectful comment. We don't need to get hostile over any of this, because I do know some people who can get hostile, and so I don't mean to offend anybody with this list. And also, if you want to list your least favorite albums in the comments, please, you are more than welcome to. But just to be clear one final time before this starts, it's all my opinion. Have we got this sorted out? Okay, good. So we're going to start out with some dishonorable mentions, albums that didn't quite make the full list. Starting off with Drake's Dark Lane demo tapes. I haven't really been a fan of Drake at all, especially in his more recent material. It's always just felt very half-assed, low effort to me, and this album really is no different. Every track follows a similar formula, just very dark, moody, rap-infused R&B. It doesn't leave much of an impression at all as a whole project, and not to mention some tracks here are just the most baffling as to why they became hits in the first place. The main offender in my eyes being Tootsie Slide, which is just so clearly trying to capitalize on the TikTok dance craze while everyone was in quarantine, and it's just so lowest common denominator, getting the least amount of work done to crank out a hit. It isn't all a train wreck though. I know I shouldn't be saying positive things on a worst list, but there will be more coming. So D4L is probably one of the best tracks he's released in a while. It's got some good energy to it. It's a banger, and the chorus from Givian, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, on Chicago Freestyle is beautiful and a highlight for this album. But as a whole, this just didn't stick with me, although I am looking forward to Certified Lover Boy next year. Hopefully that's better. Next dishonorable mention goes to Lil Tecca's Virgo World, an album I've already reviewed in full. If you're curious, there will be a link in the corner to check out, plus links for any other album I reviewed as well. Since I did already review it in full, you can see my full thoughts there, but just to sum it up for this list, it's pretty much a step down from his debut mixtape, We Love You Tecca, in pretty much every way. The highs are not as high, and the lows are even lower, especially tracks like Back It Up, Take 10, and TikTok are all pretty bad. And there are very few tracks that try to capture the magic of what made Tecca appealing in the first place. I'm not sure if that's meant to mean that he's maturing, but all I'm hoping is we get some more bangers from Tecca going forward. Another album I've already reviewed in full, the next dishonorable mention, Wi-Fi's Funeral with Pain. Wi-Fi has been an artist that I've been keeping extremely minor tabs on. I was fairly interested during the time when he was on the XXL freshman class, I believe that was 2017, and then I reviewed one of his singles slightly poorly on Twitter, and he blocked me. So that's good. Anyway, I'd been away from his music for a while since, but this album, Pain, kinda informed me that there wasn't much I was missing. Really just a lot of moody, emotional, depressed boy rap that I've sort of begun to grow out of. A lot of the tracks start to feel very similar, both in production and lyrical content. It's not really a project I can honestly see people listening to in full more than once. Maybe he'll surprise me with an upcoming project in the future, like his Leave Me the Fuck Alone EP from 2018, but I'll just take Backache as a guilty pleasure and be on my merry way. The next dishonorable mention goes to Ellie Goulding with Brightest Blue. Oh my god, one of the most uninteresting one-note pop albums I've heard all year. It's like the pop equivalent of eating a bland rice cake with nothing on it. And it's a real bad sign when the 5 bonus tracks attached to the end of the album is more entertaining than the actual main course. I only really found 3 tracks off here that I would even bother to keep on: Power, Tides, and Flux, especially Flux. But everything else here is just so sterile, and shows she's playing catch-up with the modern zeitgeist in music today. Bunch of bland, moody, atmospheric pop with some decent ballads. In fact, even revisiting this album twice for this list, I still can't name any other tracks aside from the ones that left even bigger, more disappointing holes in my heart as once a fan of Ellie. Mainly the track How Deep Is Too Deep, a song about being caught in this relationship with a guy who isn't in it for true love, yet plays such a facade anyway. I would have expected a grand emotional drop at the end of the chorus, but instead it just falls like a rock down a well. There's nothing aside from some submerged synth pops and right into a second verse a couple seconds later. And aside from power, there's really no soaring tracks that use Ellie's voice to its most captivating and gripping potential. It's all just flat, and I'm just really hoping this is a bump in her road for her future endeavors. Next dishonorable mention, this one really hurt. It was Jason Mraz's Look for the Good. Easily the biggest disappointment this year for me, more so than any other record coming up on the list. I was one of the very slight few people who defended his last album, No, for being a fun, carefree, breezy pop album that while it was corny in spots, there was some singer-songwriter charm to the lyrics there. But this album just threw Jason into such a nosedive. I was just shocked and appalled at the reggae-fused songs, and every track is almost 5 minutes long. It's full of the same generic reggae beats, which for the most part are okay. There's nothing offensive with the musical side. But with this being such a strong departure from Jason's brand of singer-songwriter poppy material, it's definitely staggering to say the least. There are some fun tracks here, mainly at the start of the record. I don't mind the title track. Good Old Days is alright, and Wise Woman is a pretty good song as well, probably my favorite. But towards the end, we start to get overly playful. The tracks DJ FM AM J Jason and Hearing Double borderline on goofy, very playful, and almost novel parody way more than anything else he's done before. Even tracks like Unlonely off his last album weren't this silly. Plus the song You Do You is just ruined by Tiffany Haddish's feature. Jason singing about how there's only one version of me, and that's a great thing. Don't follow the masses, be who you want to be, plus believing in equality for everyone regardless of race, gender, or sexual orientation. It's a sweet message, and then Tiffany comes in like, "Woo! I'ma let you finish, but girl power! We're the best! Ladies are gonna rule the world!" I get she says later in her verse that she just wants women to be treated equally, have a voice, which is absolutely true and should have happened years ago, but come on, it just comes off as a bit insensitive to Jason's original topic. This album just kind of pissed me off. I'm thankful Jason seems to be enjoying what he loves, clearly following his own message of you do you, I'll do me, but this style just didn't stick the landing for me personally. Next dishonorable mention goes to Lil Yachty with Lil Boat 3. I really didn't know what else to expect from a Lil Yachty album in 2020, and I'm kinda sad that this is what we got instead. Much like Tecca, Yachty seems to be isolating himself from the style and quirkiness that made him big, and is resorting to darker, more almost threatening production, I guess. But God, can we just get the spring back in Yachty's music? He's been on a strong decline since Lil Boat 2, in my opinion, just devolving into formulaic, boring rap songs. Even the lead single to this record wasn't memorable at all, Oprah's Bank Account with DaBaby and Drake. In fact, Yachty's probably undergone one of the biggest derailments in modern rap today. Anyone remember that whole dual personality thing that was going on between Lil Boat and Lil Yachty? That was creative, albeit slightly corny at times, but at least it was interesting, unlike about 75 to 80% of this album. And the rest of it I remember because of the features, especially TD with Tyler the Creator, Tierra Whack, and A$AP Rocky. That's one of the best bangers he's released in a while, and Yachty is the most forgettable part of that track. I just really don't see any hype or interest for a new Lil Yachty album in the future. Unless he brings back the old styles, he'll probably fall into obscurity pretty quickly and just be a relic of better, more fun times in rap music. And the final dishonorable mention is going to Five Finger Death Punch with their album Fate. So I haven't really gotten into Five Finger Death Punch's catalog until this year, and I see all the other YouTube critics just shitting on them because it's some sort of just casual joke that everyone knows, and I laugh along because I think it's funny, but this year, I got curious and I checked out their new album, which was supposedly meant to be this revitalization, and now I actually get the joke because this type of music, it just isn't my cup of tea at all. While I don't mind some of the tracks instrumental-wise, they're all pretty safe and inoffensive, but it's Ivan Moody's persona that sours a good majority of these tracks in my opinion. His growly, aggressive presence on these tracks comes off as your school bully's actions and internal struggles harnessed in music form. It's all pretty laughable and not appealing, especially songs like This Is War or Bottom of the Top. In my opinion, though, it is one of their better records as a whole in modern years. Ivan's casual singing voice isn't terrible, just really generic. You wouldn't be able to tell it apart from any other band doing anything different. And his voice really works with some of the slower songs here, in fact a little bit off, which I think is actually a great song, capturing that feeling of emotional instability. But as a whole, the record just came across as trying marginally harder to make a good record. But it just kind of seems like a lot of the same stuff just rehashed ever so slightly, and it didn't sit with me at all. Alright, that was it for the dishonorable mentions. Time to get into the actual list. We will start at number 10 with Sam Hunt and Southside. This was a surprisingly tough album to place because I didn't hate it as much as everyone else I've seen. I thought some of the melodies on a lot of these tracks were pretty solid, the instrumentals weren't abysmal, and Sam Hunt isn't the worst vocalist in country today by a long shot. But what really sold me to put this album on the list was all of the other negative parts, mainly regarding a lot of the lyrical content here. They are unavoidable and ruin nearly every track on this record to some extent. The biggest offender, in my opinion, being Body Like a Back Row, which is just so bad no matter how you look at it. Either he's comparing this girl's body to a back road, dirty, uneven, and full of potholes, or it's a back road that he's driven many times before. In that case, it's extremely predictable and basic. And let's not forget he was talking about his wife in this song, so yeah, it's kind of awkward. Sinning With You is another very abhorrent track, one of the uglier ones sonically too, but also about how their sex isn't considered sin at all, and it's so exaggerated and downright disgusting at times. I do think the album starts pretty okay with 2016, easily the best track on the record too, and Hard to Forget became a pretty quick guilty pleasure of mine for me with its catchy, enjoyable melody despite ruining a country classic in There Stands the Glass with its sampling. But after that, it just becomes a nightmare to get through with quite a few forgettable tracks, horrible lyrical content, and just bad songs with Sam's clunky fusion of trap and country. If you can stomach enjoyment out of this, I commend you, because this time I gotta side with nearly all the other critics here that this album just feels gross. And considering this was originally teased 3 years ago with Body Like a Back Road being the lead single and everything else just fizzling disastrously, thankfully it didn't leave too much of an impact upon release, and hopefully we lose this guy sooner rather than later. Number 9, this one's probably going to get me some flack. I had to put Childish Gambino's 3:15:20 on here. Frankly, I don't really care though. This album didn't catch me on first listen, and it still really doesn't. Childish Gambino has been one of those artists that I've wanted to get into for a while, but never really had the time or frankly the desire to. He's been on the back burner for me, and I have checked out some of his tracks in the past few years, mainly starting with This Is America, and that Summertime pack he released with Feels Like Summer, which did make the cut for this record in the form of the track 4226, and it's still one of the best songs here. I had a slight amount of hype when this was announced, and this album did very little to justify that hype. First off, I just really hate the formatting of this record. It just feels so forced with its blank album cover, most of the song titles just being timestamps for the record. It just comes across like Donald Glover really didn't care about the production side of this record and just shit out something to please fans. Speaking of production, some of it is pretty atrocious. One of the biggest offenders here is the track 3222 with this bass that just goes so high in its distortion, and it builds up more and more, gradually becoming this horrible cacophony in the first half of the track with Donald spitting nonsensical gibberish. It's an ugly track. I also didn't really care for 4748, which really just sounds like Feels Like Summer 2, even down to the same synth melody, the buttery falsetto, even though it has a solid message about loving yourself and living in the moment. In fact, there are still decent tracks here, but I personally enjoyed 3531 with its catchy melody, even if it does go on for a little bit too long in my opinion without any change-ups. Also, Algorithm is a really good song as well. With the industrial beat, staticky vocals, it's a pretty good bop. But there was very little else that stood out to me on this. Even 1238 with 21 Savage, Inc. and Kaja Bone, I'm terribly sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But that one didn't stick with me either, and presented one of the most unremarkable 21 Savage features I've heard in a long time. I even questioned where he was when I revisited the album and heard this track again. This just came off as really lazy to me. It catches my attention for a brief second and then nosedives hard. And it really didn't inspire me to listen to his other music. Maybe I will eventually, but this just felt like no thought or care was put into it. Kind of a shame. Number 8 is going to Justin Bieber with his album Changes. And yeah, Changes is an appropriate title because wow did Justin change things up here, and certainly not for the better. Because now it looks like he's making the transition to become an R&B star, and if Changes is a harbinger for what's to come, then I'd rather have Purpose-era Justin Bieber back because some of this shit is pretty bad. Let's start with the elephant in the album, Yummy. One of the worst songs of the entire year. Gross lyrics about having that yummy, yummy, plus really obvious tie-ins to modern rap with stuff like riding in the Lambo, getting lit, which is repeated again on the Travis Scott-assisted Second Emotion, which is an even worse song. Travis delivers one of his most phoned-in features in years, the flat drum and rap-inspired flow from Justin. I mean, this album just feels like the track Yummy. It's gross. Also, something I will never get over is the Lil Dicky feature on Running Over, and I will never stop pointing out that there was supposed to be a Ski Mask the Slump God feature here, but instead we got corny, just as gross Lil Dicky. Miraculously, it's not all hell though. I think Intentions is one of the more solid bops here. I'm glad it became a radio hit despite having some really corny lyrics where he shouts out her mom and dad for making her. And Confirmation is another really nice tune. Smooth and works well with Justin's vocals, except for the bizarre intro cut where he makes a mistake somewhere and asks to redo it. Like, why not just cut that out? I'm shocked this is what we got from a 5-year wait in between albums. The singles Justin was a part of before this album, the more electronic poppy cuts, I thought most were pretty okay. Friends with Blood Pop, 2U with David Guetta, even the 2 DJ Khaled tracks had a nice summery feel to them. But I don't think anyone expected this hideous transformation. Sure, there are some saving graces here, most were previously mentioned, but as a whole, Justin should probably change yet again back to his poppier self and crank out some more bops and leave this R&B junk behind. Number 7, I'm sure if you watched my best list, you saw this coming. It's 6ix9ine with Tattletales. Anyone remember on that list when I put Gooba on there and I said we would get to this eventually? Yeah, here it is. And also how I mentioned that this is the only true refuge on this record? Yeah, it's really true. This is just appalling. Sure, I enjoyed Gooba quite a bit. It had some nice energy to it, still does, with 6ix9ine delivering a solid verse. It felt like some of his more angry material that I naturally found a lot to vibe to. But then it all went downhill with the song Trolls, one of the worst songs he's released. To be fair though, I never liked 6ix9ine in his calmer rapping style, and he dives so far down that rabbit hole he barely sounds like himself on this track, slurring and mumbling with a higher pitched delivery. It's grating to listen to that damn hook, and the Nicki feature does not save the song either. The rest of the album is also pretty bad. The opener, Locked Up Part 2, is just a sequel to Akon's track of the same name without the Part 2, and Akon's hook is easily the best part of the tune, and he returns again on this album in the track Leia, really recalling back to Akon's heyday with his instrumental just sounding like a rehash from an old hit of his. Not to mention all the tropical reggaeton tracks that are god-awful as well, another format I don't really enjoy 6ix9ine in, songs like Ya Ya and Nini. Some of the tracks try to get into a bit more of a party style, like Charlie, which guest rapper Smiles is the best part of the track. 6ix9ine's verse is very clunky and awkward. Also, Gotta with Lil AK, while much more dark, has these club synths that don't mix at all. Plus, 6ix9ine recycles bars from previous tracks here, just a definition of laziness. Closer Ava is just a depressing nothing of a track as he is trying to do his best Akon impression over this dour beat, and GTL shows 6ix9ine rapping a verse over the GTL prison phone line, but the mixing of the vocals sounds like shit, and that snare is so loud in the mix, I mean, can we just tone that damn thing down? The only track that really comes anywhere to being close to decent is Punani, but the intro and the refrain of Nasty Nasty is just detestable. It kills the momentum of the track. So yeah, this was a disappointment, as I once upon a time had hope for a 6ix9ine comeback, but this album kind of shot that down so fast, and it seemed to sour the public eye of him as well, which, I mean, works for me. Number 6, we got Future with High Off Life. No doubt this one's gonna stir up some shit as well, as I've really seen nothing but positive reviews for this album, but personally, this just rubs me in all the wrong ways in pretty much every single aspect. Let's start with the main problem in my opinion. This was the album, at least in my eyes, that showed this acceptability for artists to bloat their albums with filler to game the system and get all the streaming numbers, which I personally found incredibly selfish, putting out such mediocre hits, some even barely taking like more than an hour to write, and just cluttering them all into one project that's over 20 tracks long. The act just makes me sick, and Future kind of gave everybody the green light with a big name doing the same thing that everyone had been doing for years. Rant aside, and big shocker if you were listening, the rest of the music isn't that appealing either. Sure, there are some moments that stand out as enjoyable. Tycoon has a very high energy flow combined with a skeletal beat, and Opener Trapped in the Sun has some solid melodies, but when you have 21 tracks, you're bound to end up with some duds, and oh boy, are there quite a few on here. For example, High Tech Tech, which shows Future with one of the laziest and blandest hooks I've heard in a while, plus this Playboy Cardi-esque baby voice a little bit that I have never found appealing at all. And I also don't really care for the Drake collaboration on Life is Good that blew up. One of the most sleepy instrumentals on this record with the ambient synths over the bare-bones trap percussion, and Drake rapping in a slightly above monotone delivery still doesn't make it any good. And while the beat change is okay, Future's deeper delivery kinda homogenizes a little bit too well, and gets blended together, and almost makes the track like one straight wall of noise. Outer Space B is another track that just doesn't grab me with the gentle, pillowy synth, combined with the grittier percussion which just clash in every way possible, plus another lazy, almost quiet Future hook. There's really zero energy to that at all. I could go on all day about this album, but I think most of you get the point. This album didn't do anything for me. I'll happily take anything Future released in the mid-2010s over this stuff. Next. Number 5, this one may come as a bit of a shock to you, it's Kygo's Golden Hour. Really? I mean, come on, just an EDM producer's collection of tracks is one of the worst albums of the year? Well, in my mind, yes, but not in the same reason you might think. As a pop head, you may think some of these tracks would naturally click with me, and while a good portion of them do, I never really enjoyed the standard wash, rinse, repeat EDM that's been clogging up the mainstream lately, like Marshmello and of course Kygo here. So what makes this record one of the worst albums of the year in my opinion? I mean, really, I just said I don't mind a decent handful of the tracks here. Wouldn't it just be a forgettable, mundane EDM record and move on? No, because this album was special. This album, believe it or not, actually put me to sleep out of pure boredom. On first listen of this record, I actually fell asleep listening to it because this album is so bland, unbelievably basic. White drywall, milquetoast. It deserved a spot on this list. 18 tracks, 61 minutes of the same verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, over and over and over again. Most of these tracks, I mean, if they were a regular single, they'd be harmless. Sure, songs like Higher Love with the late Whitney Houston and Lose Somebody with One Republic already were, but I'm also talking about the other cuts here, like Broken Glass with Kim Petras, Could You Love Me with Dreamlab, and Hurting with Reese Lewis. They're all pretty okay pop songs. I wouldn't be against listening to them on the radio. Sure, there are some forgettable duds, but for the most part, the tunes individually here are solid. But just the packaging, the way this album as a whole consistent listen was wrapped up and shipped out is overwhelmingly sleep-inducing. And that mainly shows in a lot of the opening leg to this album. Beautiful with Sandra Cavassa, To Die For with Saint Lundy, and especially the Oh Wonder collaboration How Would I Know. Generic, cookie-cutter EDM that couldn't grab me or even keep me awake in the context of a full record. Sure, maybe this was a little bit of an exaggeration to put this record here, but there has not been an album in recent years to basically serve as my version of musical NyQuil. And this album did it. So that's a new level of bad for me. I think it deserves a spot. Number 4, we're really starting to get into the stinkers here. We got Diplo, with Diplo Presents Thomas Wesley, Chapter 1, Snake Oil. I wonder how many of you are actually shocked to see this monster on the list. Yes, Diplo's supposed new artistic and musical direction, shredding the Diplo persona and introducing the world to Thomas Wesley, which is Diplo's actual name. He's distancing himself from the stage name he built his career on and showing the world his true colors, his true ambitions as a country-ish producer. And if this is the path Diplo wants to go down, I mean, I fully support him. No ill will towards him as a person, and I'm not trying to stomp on him or his goals. But oh boy, this album was a little bit of a dumpster fire for me. Let's get some brief positives out of the way here first. I do enjoy the lead single Heartless with Morgan Wallen, although that's probably only because I've heard it a lot of times and it's just grown on me with its earnest energy. Unsurprisingly, with this new direction, Diplo has also brought on some contemporaries in the country world for features, such as the previously mentioned Morgan Wallen, also Cam, Thomas Rhett, and Zach Brown, most of which contribute pretty well, especially Cam on So Long, which is another track I find a decent bit to enjoy. But also, Diplo seems to be trying to fuse some genres here, bringing in other acts that may sound very familiar. The Jonas Brothers, Noah Cyrus, Julia Michaels, and Young Thug. And most of them are pretty bad, especially the Young Thug Thomas Rhett combination on Dance With Me. Young Thug ruined the song with his presence. Also, the Jonas Brothers single Lonely is on here, and it really shouldn't be. It's barely a country track, and just feels like it should have been on Happiness Begins as a deluxe track. Of course, Diplo couldn't shy away from throwing his remix of Old Town Road on here as well, which in my opinion was the worst of the remix apocalypse that song got. It took all the fun out of that track and turned it into a club dubstep jam with a very weak drop. Although the most atrocious song on here is easily Do-Si-Do with Blanco Brown. With Blanco delivering these lyrics in this, I guess, grittier tone, it's more like a creepy whisper, and it's just really uncomfortable to listen to. The harmonica and claps for the drop do absolutely nothing as well. So yeah, this is one of the most bizarre things Diplo's ever done, and honestly, I'm just hoping he goes back to making pop hits. They were all pretty good, and I hope this won't become a permanent endeavor for his career, because I don't think I could stomach another chapter of this. Top 3, baby, here we go. Number 3, we got Wanna by Gunna. To this day, Gunna's success still just baffles me. I will never understand where his superstar status came from. Originally just a Young Thug offshoot and protege before coming into the big leagues off the success of that Drip Harder collab album with Lil Baby. And in my eyes, he was easily the weaker of the duo and still is today. Lil Baby's album this year, My Turn, I thought was very solid, his best work to date. Catchy songs and isn't affected by its long track list, surprisingly. However, Gunna's Wunna is a little bit of a different story. I do think it's his best as well, but it's still not good. Positives out of the way again, this album starts very strong with one of his best tracks I've heard in a long time, Argentina. He's got a nice flow and switches it up quite a bit, plus the oriental flavors in the instrumental are huge compliments, but it never reaches those heights again in the remaining 45 minutes. MLTW, an acronym for Money on the Way, just sounds like a bunch of other mumbly, moody tracks I've heard before, even down to the flow. And while I enjoyed those previous tracks, Gunna's deeper, sleep-deprived delivery just makes the track boring to listen to. I also really didn't like the title track, with its brutally minuscule and tiny flows, going to the point of 2 syllables per bar. I've always hated small flows like that, and it's always just come off as so lazy, like no one cared about making a captivating tune at all behind Gunna's slurred vocals. Now, I know what a bunch of people right now are probably thinking, or even typing in the comments right now. Dude, it's just a vibe, relax, don't take it so seriously. First off, I'm a music reviewer, I kinda have to take it seriously. And second, I agree, it definitely does work as a vibe. When listening to this album and it's just in my head, it is enjoyable, absolutely. But just think about that for a second. Gunna's music works best as background noise. Nothing more. As soon as you bring it to the forefront, the flaws and cracks really begin to show. The repetitive tracks, the really bizarre lyrics, and a lack of an engaging MC, and just a feeling of zero effort. That's the last thing a critic wants to listen to. An album that sounds half-assed and aiming for the lowest common denominator there is. If you enjoy this record, please don't let me sway you at all, but this is my list, this is my opinion, and Gunna will most likely remain one of the 2 anomalies in rap music today. Number 2, I really thought this was going to be number 1, it's Nav with Good Intentions. Nav is the second of those 2 anomalies in rap today, as his success is even more baffling to me. Starting off as an upstart on the Weeknd's EXO label, releasing his debut album in 2017, an album that I did find some novelty to. But as Nav kept on going through the past few years, releasing an album or 2 every year as most rappers tend to do these days, why he became so popular and still holds a fairly loyal fanbase just becomes so much more confusing, and his first record this year, Good Intentions, is the lowest Nav has gone to date. First off, let's just say what everyone else knows and has heard 1,000 times before, Nav as an MC is one of the biggest non-presences in rap today. The guy's voice is so robotic, it's stiff, it's hollow, downright emotionless at times. His flow is fixed extremely tightly, and his lyrics border on corny to cringy, and all that carries to this album as well. I'd normally list out some brief positives about this record at this point, but this is probably the only album on this list that really doesn't have any positives that are noteworthy. The best I can commend Nav on this record is that sometimes he gives an engaging flow, like on Turks, which is probably my favorite track here. Or he showcases some slight emotional weight to make the track kinda sound like it was man-made, but aside from that, I'm amazed at how processed it all sounds. Nav even recycles his own flow from his big hit Tap more than once on this record. Like, just use a new flow. It's just lazy, and as much as I feel like I should list off some negatives here, you kind of already got the gist of it from my description. It's flat, it's mundane, it's boring. Unlike the Gunna record, which can and does work under a less focused background noise scenario, Good Intentions really doesn't, and that's because Nav doesn't have a soothing voice to vibe to, and doesn't use any moody instrumentals that could be vibe-worthy in the first place. What's worse is that Nav followed the trend Lil Uzi started, yet again recycling ideas, and released a deluxe edition less than a week later. I mean, which even Uzi waited like a month, but he dropped Brown Boy 2, a full new record, 14 tracks, and it's just more of the same. There is nothing that separates the 2 records, unlike Uzi's Eternal Take and Lil Uzi Vert vs. the World 2. It all just coagulates into this heap of nothing, and that's what this album is. Thankfully, he seems to be on the rise with Emergency Tsunami, which is easily his best and most enjoyable, but this is a stain of an album. And you might be asking, why isn't this number 1? This seems like the worst record by far. Well, that's because there was another, and unlike Nav, where I knew he wasn't going to impress going in, number 1 just was a heavy disappointment. Number 1, Here it is, folks. It's Black Eyed Peas with Translation. Yep, Black Eyed Peas. What a shame. Okay, for starters, I really hope I'm not the only one who thought that their previous album, Masters of the Sun Volume 1, was a fairly good comeback and an even stronger release in general. It brought the Black Eyed Peas back into the mainstream, kind of. Didn't have that much of an impact, but it showed the group was still competent and could put out bangers. 2 years later, and we got Translation, an album in a similar vein to the Diplo album, with the group taking a sonic divergence from any of their previous releases, diving headfirst into the world of reggaeton. Now, if you know anything about me or you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that reggaeton isn't a genre that I'm all that versed in, nor all that intrigued by in the first place. So already this wasn't looking too good, but when the whole thing dropped, whew, well, do we get one dumpster fire of a record. Let's start with the album's biggest hit, the song that really shot the band back into the mainstream, Ritmo. God, this song got on my nerves so damn quickly. That repeated chorus, that repeated sample, everything about this track just speaks annoying on so many different levels. In fact, the features for this record should have been an immediate turnoff for me. Maluma, J Balvin, Nicki Jam, Becky G, French Montana, and Shakira? Bunch of the big-name reggaeton stars in French Montana don't really encapsulate me in any of these songs, nor have they ever in anything they've really been featured on in the first place, but God, if there's one thing I hate above all else in reggaeton, it's the overuse of that damn beat. You know the one if you've listened to this genre at all, and I know that may sound petty, but how would you feel if every single pop song had the exact same structure and melody, but just with a different voice behind it? Would you get annoyed from it? Because I know damn sure that I would. And that beat is everywhere on this record. Sure, there are some changes, but it's the same foundation and it screams laziness to me. The production is very middle of the road, and aside from action, there's really not any beats that stand out to me at all. And I can see most of these tracks falling into obscurity in about a year, maybe 2, max. I can still manage to say one thing positive about this record, it's that the closer News Today is the best track here. Even if it is just commentary regarding the COVID-19 pandemic led by a sentimental acoustic guitar, it really stands out like a breath of fresh air, the light at the end of the tunnel. But aside from that, the journey through said tunnel is painful, it's downright pandering to modern tropes with how big reggaeton is right now, and it easily takes my crown as the worst album of 2020. Whew, talk about a long video. And hey, if you made it this far, thank you. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed what you see, and I will see all of you in the next video. Peace.